Paul, are you part of this discussion?
Yeah, but this is the part where you guys ask the questions and then they start to talk. Remember that whole discussion we just had? Remember that? Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
I feel like Chris Rock. Yeah. So, who's going to start? Right there. Stand up.
Hey, Doug, how you doing?
Hey, I know you.
So, you have a 30 watt and a 50 watt.
Correct.
When I heard the 50 watt is walls loud. So, I mean, it's louder than a typical 50 watt from what I understand.
Yes.
Why?
Well, because I have the, I had this wacky idea. When we started building both of these amps, I was determined not to make a clone of, for the 30 watt amp, I didn't want an AC30 clone. For the 50 watt amp, I didn't want a Plexi clone. And I was really adamant. Doug and I talked about that from the word go. Let's do something different. The world does not need another clone amp. And on the 50 one, we built one, and I had a lot of really bad ideas about things that I thought we should pursue, and so we kind of got that out of the way. And then I had another sort of lame brain idea that, Doug, what would happen if we took 4 EL34s, put 2 rectifiers in the amp, and made it a 50 watt amp, a cathode bias 50 watt amp? What could that be done, and what would it involve? And he said, well, I'll have to think about that one. And lo and behold, that's what we did. And I play through the thing, and it's, I swear it's more than 50 watts. Doug swears that on the scope, there's no doubt about it. I've heard 45 and I've heard 50. I don't know which one exactly is exactly the figure, but it just is a big adult amplifier, I will say that much. It's not for the faint of heart. The 30 is a lot more probably practical for most people. I use it on a weekly basis in a club, and I get to turn it all the way up, at least as loud as I want it. I have the master volume wide open. The 50 watt, in some ways, actually sounds better to me if you turn the master down to about 8. But it's not more. It is 50 watts. I don't know. It's just the thing. And I was talking to Eric Johnson about this a lot, about 4-tube amplifiers. When you have 4 power tubes, you get this all the electrons and harmonics are dancing around together, and there's more of them. And he kind of put that idea in my head too. And I thought, well, I don't think that's ever been done. Take 4 EL34s, cathode bias, somehow find a way. And Doug would have to tell you how he did it. But all I know is it sounds stout. It's big. I used the 30 and the 50, the only 2 amps I used on my new record. And they both have their own role, but we really designed them. It was really important to me that even though they were completely different designs, and they can fill different roles, that they respond the same. That I would really rely on an amp. I really want an amp that is touch sensitive, and the little things I do with my hands and the way I pick and how hard I press down with my left finger all translate through the amplifier into different tones and nuances. And both of these amps are extremely touch sensitive. One is just one is louder and a little bit more, it'll hit you right in the chest. If you think of, if anybody ever saw Billy Gibbons play in 1977, and he started out "Jesus Just Left Chicago," the way that first big G on the fourth string would hit you. That's what that amp does. So, is it louder than a 50 watt amp? I don't know.
Well, it's got all the makings of a 100 watt amp. It just hits the rails, the distortion rails at 50 watts. So it's kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing as far as power goes. So it'll hit the rails and go into distortion, and when you hit the rails, that's when you take the measurement for a clean headroom of this, and that's where you get the 50 watts. But it'll do way more than that in spades if you push it. So it's like I said, 4 EL34s, 100 watt output transformers. It's just a lot of current flowing through it and a low plate voltage to get the wattage that the tube is dissipating under control. So it's just, and the more you jack up that current, the more these harmonics start coming in, and it's a fine line and a balance and a couple of fans in the back that make it happen.
Yeah, both amps have 2 fans in the back. And the 30 has gone through 3 or 4 different iterations. And, we're talking about the 3 years of work here, really. I mean, to be honest with you. The first 30 we built did not have the tube rectifier. It was solid state and it had no master volume. The second iteration, which eventually ended up where we are now, initially the amp was running so hot that the tubes were breaking off where the tube retainers came over. 3 or 4 power tubes just kind of came apart inside the amp. But you have to kind of hit those walls to know when you've gone too far and when to pull back. And so far, knock on wood, been using mainly the 30 just because of the volume considerations live now for a little over a year, and I've had no issues whatsoever. And that was, again, just like the guitar, the DGT guitar, it was super important to me to put in the time in the real world, playing them on literally hundreds of gigs and sessions, and make sure that there were no surprises. And there's no substitute for getting out there and when in the moment of truth, when you're not in your bedroom or your studio, how is that amp going to perform? And is it going to cut through the band? Is it going to be big? Is it going to be too loud? Is it going to be harsh to the people in the front row? And I play every Tuesday night at the Saxon Pub in Austin, and people are right down there at the edge of the stage, and I have this amp cranked, and never once have I seen anybody go like this or leave, and so that to me is really a good barometer of, how we voice these amps. Really want the bottom end to be tight and the top notes to be thick. So it's been a lot of work, man. And again, I think if you buy a good amplifier, it ought to perform equally well on gigs and in the studio. Early in my career, I had a bunch of great vintage old Marshalls that, live, they sounded godlike when you stood in front of them, and then I'd take them into the studio, and I wasn't really able to get the same tones that I was hearing when I would stand 10 feet in front of the amplifier. And so we worked really, really hard and made sure I made sure that I used them on a lot of sessions to ensure that it really didn't take any more than somebody that knew how to put a microphone in front of the speaker to get a good sound in the studio. And I think if you buy an expensive amplifier, you ought to have an amplifier that you can use in any situation live in the studio. And I think it ought to cover a lot of different bases and be able to, you ought to be able to use it on a jazz gig, a country gig, a blues gig, and a rock gig. I don't think that if it's a well-built, well-designed amplifier, you don't need to have 10 amplifiers.
All right.